"You're not going to believe who I really am," the man said, his voice calm but carrying weight, and Eleanor froze in place, gripping the worn leather bench beneath her fingers as the cold air bit at her cheeks and nose. The early winter sun casting long shadows across the park where the few scattered leaves rustled like whispers. She had been sitting there for nearly an hour, watching the occasional jogger pass and feeling the stiffness of her bones protest against the chill, her breath forming small clouds in the air, when a shiver ran down her spine, not from the temperature, but from the strange intensity in his eyes that seemed both familiar and distant, like they had seen far more than she could understand in this fleeting moment. And yet there was a softness that hinted at warmth, a kind of vulnerability that made her heart beat faster despite the sharpness of the cold. Eleanor had come to the park with a simple mission: to enjoy the quiet before the week began, to feed the birds as she always did, and perhaps lose herself in a book. But this unexpected presence changed everything, making the small act of kindness she had offered to a shivering man moments ago now feel like the pivot of some unseen narrative. And as she watched him straighten, adjusting the brim of his hat against the weak sun, she remembered her own past kindnesses, the small gestures she had extended throughout her life that had never seemed to matter. Yet here, in this precise, frozen moment, they suddenly seemed to carry weight, and Eleanor wondered if chance had brought him here or if something greater was at play. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, neatly folded envelope, extending it toward her without a word, and Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she took it, feeling the crisp paper between her fingers, the texture oddly comforting against the biting wind. And as she unfolded it, the contents revealed a message that made her pause, a mixture of disbelief and quiet astonishment, the sort of revelation that could change the course of an ordinary morning into something extraordinary. And in that instant, the park seemed larger, the cold more acute, yet the sunlight touched her face in a way that made her feel a flicker of hope she hadn't experienced in years, a reminder that even the smallest act, a simple gesture of kindness offered without expectation, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways unseen until the right moment, until the right person noticed. And Eleanor realized that this morning, on this freezing bench, something profound had been set into motion, a hidden world brushing against her ordinary existence. And all at once the ordinary had become remarkable, the mundane transformed into a moment that would linger in memory, a story that might be told many times over, whispered in awe at how a single act could uncover truths buried beneath layers of everyday life, leaving Eleanor both humbled and quietly exhilarated as she folded the note and looked up at the stranger with a measured, calm smile that spoke of curiosity and anticipation rather than fear, ready to witness the consequences of this brief encounter, to step into the unfolding chapter of her life that had begun not with fanfare or announcement, but with the simple, piercing weight of revelation on a freezing bench. The wind continued to whip across the park, carrying the faint scent of pine and the distant hum of early morning traffic, and Eleanor shifted slightly on the bench, feeling the stiffness in her back and the chill creeping through her coat, her fingers brushing the edges of the note as if to anchor herself to reality, each breath forming tiny clouds that drifted upward, dissolving into the gray sky. She observed the stranger carefully, noticing the subtle way he tucked a strand of hair behind his ear and the faint crease of thought between his brows, small details that made her wonder what hidden story lay behind the calm exterior. And as she watched him rise to retrieve a discarded coffee cup from a nearby trash can, she felt a flicker of curiosity, the kind that made her pulse quicken not with fear, but with anticipation, her mind replaying the countless mornings she had spent alone on this very bench, feeding birds and watching life unfold in its quiet rhythms. And now the scene had shifted, infused with potential and mystery, as if the ordinary could suddenly contain the extraordinary. Eleanor folded the note back into her palm, feeling its weight both literal and symbolic, a tangible reminder that small gestures could carry far-reaching consequences. And she recalled moments from her past, the gentle kindnesses she had shown neighbors, friends, and even strangers, none of which had seemed remarkable at the time. But now she understood that those simple acts, rendered without expectation, might be the currency that unlocked doors she had never imagined. The stranger returned, a subtle smile on his face that did not need explanation, and Eleanor mirrored it with a cautious lift of her own lips, acknowledging the unspoken understanding between them, the silent recognition that something significant had begun, and she felt the crisp winter air settle around her shoulders, a mixture of chill and clarity. The park transformed from a backdrop of solitude into a stage for the unfolding revelation, and as she adjusted her scarf and straightened her coat, she sensed the day ahead would not proceed as any ordinary morning had, that her steps would carry her through unexpected encounters, measured choices, and the quiet unfolding of events that would reveal layers of truth. And in that moment, Eleanor recognized the profound resonance of patience, observation, and discreet courage, the virtues that had guided her through a lifetime of small decisions. And she breathed in deeply, feeling the sunlight glint faintly off frost-tipped branches, the sound of a distant dog barking, the occasional rustle of a newspaper caught in a breeze, and understood that the ordinary world she had known was now overlaid with potential, possibility, and subtle power, and she waited, not with anxiety but with a poised expectation, for the story to continue its course, knowing that every detail, every quiet decision, every unspoken word might hold significance, and that the kindness she had offered, small and sincere, had already set forces in motion that she would witness and respond to with measured grace and unhurried attention. The stranger lifted his gaze, and Eleanor noticed a faint glimmer of amusement in his eyes as he spoke, each word deliberate and measured, hinting at knowledge she could not yet comprehend, and she shifted slightly on the bench, the chill in the air pressing against her coat, her breath shallow and visible, mingling with the small clouds that dissipated slowly into the winter sky, while the distant hum of traffic and the occasional crunch of gravel underfoot provided a quiet rhythm to the otherwise still park. She tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear and folded her hands over the envelope once more, feeling the weight of it in her lap, the texture familiar yet now imbued with the significance of the moment, and she reflected on the countless days she had spent in quiet acts of kindness, the small gestures of attention she had given to neighbors, friends, and strangers, never imagining that such simple efforts could lead to consequences of great magnitude, consequences she now sensed were hovering on the horizon, and the stranger's slight nod and measured posture suggested that her intuition was not misplaced, that the world she had known would soon intersect with a story far larger than she could have anticipated, and Eleanor found herself studying the sharp edges of the frost-laden branches above, tracing their outlines against the pale morning sky, noting the way sunlight caught the ice in delicate glints that made the scene almost ethereal, a quiet reminder that beauty and revelation often arrive together unexpectedly. The stranger gestured subtly toward a nearby path lined with benches, and Eleanor rose carefully, aware of the stiffness in her knees and the cold biting at her fingers, moving with a cautious determination, and as they walked together she observed the way his eyes flicked briefly to the envelope in her hand, a silent acknowledgement that her earlier act of kindness had not gone unnoticed, and that this moment, seemingly ordinary in its setting, was charged with significance, the sort that reshapes perception and invites the world to reveal itself in unforeseen ways. And Eleanor felt a mixture of anticipation and quiet resolve, understanding that she was about to witness events unfold that would test her patience, judgment, and the very nature of her kindness. And she walked forward, her steps measured and deliberate, ready to meet the revelation with clarity and calm, fully aware that the day ahead, framed by frost, sunlight, and subtle gestures, would mark a turning point in the quiet rhythm of her life, revealing truths that had been concealed until the perfect convergence of time, action, and observation. The sunlight had begun to stretch longer across the frost-covered grass, glinting off icy surfaces and casting a muted glow over the park, and Eleanor walked alongside the stranger with a measured step, her breath steadying as she allowed herself to notice the subtle sounds of the morning, the distant call of a crow, the faint rustle of discarded leaves, and the gentle rhythm of footsteps echoing along the paved path, each detail grounding her in the reality of the moment, while simultaneously heightening her awareness that something profound was unfolding. She adjusted the scarf around her neck, feeling the soft fabric against her skin, and glanced toward the envelope she still held, the corners slightly worn from her fingers curling around it, a tangible symbol of both curiosity and responsibility, and she reflected briefly on the ordinary routines she had maintained for years, tending to her garden, preparing meals, running errands, all acts performed quietly, unnoticed, yet now imbued with a new sense of potential, as if this single morning could ripple backward and forward through the fabric of her daily life. Reshaping perspectives she had long held as fixed, the stranger slowed, indicating a small clearing near a cluster of benches and a low stone wall, and Eleanor followed, noting the way his posture remained relaxed but deliberate, conveying a sense of confidence and calm, a quiet command of the space that contrasted with her own tentative steps yet invited trust. And as they reached the clearing, she observed the soft glimmer of frost melting in patches where the weak sun touched the ground, the occasional feather drifting from the trees, a symbol of the transient nature of the moment and the potential for change inherent in every detail. Eleanor inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs and leaving a tingling sensation in her chest, a reminder that she was fully present, fully aware, and fully engaged in the subtle drama that had begun to unfold, and she sensed that her attentiveness, patience, and quiet determination had positioned her at the center of a narrative that would reveal layers of truth and consequence with every passing second. The stranger spoke softly, his voice carrying clearly despite the ambient sounds, his words carefully chosen, precise, and deliberate, conveying a mixture of revelation and inquiry that required Eleanor to consider not only the surface of events but the hidden connections beneath, and she listened intently, her eyes tracing the contours of the park, the frozen puddles reflecting fragmented images of trees and sky, each reflection a metaphor for the complexity of understanding and the way that small, seemingly insignificant acts could illuminate truths that had remained hidden. Eleanor folded her hands briefly over the envelope, feeling its weight as both anchor and key, a quiet reminder that her choices, attentions, and gestures mattered in ways that transcended the ordinary, and she realized that this morning, framed by frost, sunlight, and deliberate observation, marked a transition from routine to revelation, an awakening to possibilities and consequences that would unfold steadily, quietly, and irrevocably, shaping the course of events in ways she could only begin to comprehend, and she stepped forward with a calm assurance, prepared to meet the subtle unfolding of truth with measured insight and reflective patience. The stranger paused by the edge of the clearing, allowing Eleanor a moment to take in the surroundings, the frost-laden grass crunching gently beneath her shoes, and the early morning sun casting pale golden highlights across the branches above, and she noticed how every small detail, the glimmer of ice on a puddle, the faint swirl of wind through the trees, the scattered footprints in the gravel, added texture to the quiet scene, each element grounding her awareness in the present while also deepening the sense that this ordinary place had become a threshold for something remarkable. Eleanor held the envelope more firmly now, feeling its weight in her hands as a symbol of both curiosity and responsibility, the simple act of carrying it linking her past kindness with the potential unfolding before her, and she reflected briefly on the years she had spent performing quiet acts of care, bringing groceries to neighbors, offering a smile to a lonely acquaintance, taking time to listen to a friend in need, all gestures that had seemed small and inconsequential at the moment, but which now resonated with a new significance, as if each had prepared her for this encounter in subtle ways. The stranger turned to face her fully, his eyes meeting hers with a clarity that spoke volumes, neither rushing nor pressing, but allowing Eleanor to recognize that the next steps would be guided by her own decisions. And she felt a surge of calm determination, knowing that she could act with both composure and insight, and that the day's unfolding events would reveal truths that were quietly powerful, the sort that required observation, patience, and reflection rather than impulsive action. She inhaled deeply, letting the crisp winter air fill her lungs, the sensation heightening her focus and sharpening her perception, and she noted the way shadows moved across the frozen ground, the occasional chirp of a bird, the distant sound of a jogger, all contributing to a sense of rhythm and continuity. A reminder that life continued in its patterns even as something extraordinary was quietly taking shape in her presence. The stranger gestured toward a narrow path that led toward a small, sunlit pavilion at the far end of the park, and Eleanor followed, her steps measured, attuned to the subtle cues of movement, posture, and tone, recognizing that the unfolding narrative depended as much on her awareness and response as on the revelations yet to come. And she felt an intimate connection to the moment, a sense that her attention, empathy, and quiet judgment had positioned her in a place of significance where observation alone could reveal hidden truths and prepare her for the choices ahead. As they approached the pavilion, Eleanor allowed herself a final glance at the frozen landscape, appreciating the interplay of light, shadow, and reflection. The delicate frost on the railings glinting in the sun, the sense of stillness and potential mingling in the air, and she realized that her presence here, her readiness to notice, respond, and act with thoughtful calm, was precisely what would allow her to navigate the subtle unfolding of events, transforming an ordinary winter morning into a sequence of insights, revelations, and opportunities that she would carry forward with measured grace, quiet confidence, and an enduring awareness of the extraordinary potential that resides in everyday acts of kindness, observation, and reflection. The pavilion came into clearer view as Eleanor and the stranger approached, the sunlight catching the wooden beams and casting soft patterns across the frost-speckled floor, and Eleanor felt the cold air soften slightly, the warmth from the weak winter sun brushing her cheeks and hands, bringing a small comfort as she considered the envelope still resting in her grip, the contents now seeming both a promise and a question. And she realized how every careful choice, every small act of attention, over the years had prepared her for this moment of quiet revelation. She walked slowly, deliberately, taking in the details of the pavilion, the way the benches were spaced, the subtle creak of the floorboards beneath her steps, and the distant sounds of children laughing faintly from a nearby playground. A reminder that life carried on beyond this still and frozen space. Yet here, in the quiet and the sun-flecked frost, something significant was about to unfold, and Eleanor felt the tension of expectation mingled with a calm focus that allowed her to observe without distraction, noticing the stranger's gestures, the tilt of his head, the way his eyes caught the light, all signaling that he was preparing to reveal more than a simple explanation, that he was inviting her into a story she had only glimpsed in fragments. She adjusted her scarf, her fingers brushing against the soft wool, and took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the crisp winter air fill her lungs, steadying her mind and body. And she noted the subtle expressions in the stranger's face, the slight narrowing of his eyes and the small, almost imperceptible smile that suggested recognition, understanding, and perhaps approval, a quiet signal that she was on the right path, that the simple act of kindness she had offered earlier had indeed initiated a chain of events now leading to this delicate juncture. As they stepped onto the pavilion floor, Eleanor felt a heightened awareness, each sense tuned to the nuances of movement, sound, and light, and she observed the gentle sway of the bare branches outside, the way the frost reflected the sun in sparkling fragments, the distant hum of a passing vehicle, all combining into a rhythm that anchored her to the present moment, grounding her as she prepared to receive the unfolding truth. The stranger spoke softly, his words deliberate and measured, drawing her attention to the contents of the envelope and to the subtle signals in the environment, and Eleanor listened intently, absorbing each detail, each gesture, each phrase, feeling the interplay between her perception and the reality before her. And as he revealed the significance of what she had witnessed and what had been set into motion by her earlier act, Eleanor experienced a sense of quiet awe and comprehension, understanding that the ordinary gestures of her daily life, the small acts of attentiveness and kindness, had accumulated into influence and insight, shaping events in ways she could not have foreseen, but was now ready to recognize, respond to, and integrate with measured composure, reflection, and the calm certainty that comes from seeing the layers beneath the surface of every unfolding moment, the hidden connections, the subtle cause and effect, all converging in this single, crisp winter morning within the sunlit pavilion. The sunlight had climbed slightly higher, casting warmer highlights across the frost-speckled pavilion floor and reflecting off the wooden beams in subtle patterns that danced with every shift of the light. And Eleanor stood silently, observing the stranger with careful attention, noting the slight movements of his hands, the controlled inflection in his voice as he spoke, and the calm way he maintained presence in the space, a contrast to the ripple of anticipation she felt in her chest. Each beat a reminder of the extraordinary nature of the unfolding moment. She adjusted her gloves and folded the envelope neatly in her hands, feeling its weight as a connection between the act of kindness she had offered earlier and the revelation now being drawn out before her. And she recalled the many years she had lived with small gestures that went unnoticed, the quiet patience of a life devoted to careful attention, reflection, and subtle influence. Realizing that each instance of thoughtfulness had built toward a readiness to engage with this unexpected narrative that had quietly emerged from an ordinary winter morning. Eleanor took a measured step toward the center of the pavilion, her senses acutely attuned to the faint creak of the floorboards, the distant murmur of pedestrians along the park path, the rustle of leaves caught in intermittent breezes, and the soft flicker of sunlight on icy patches, all details anchoring her in the present while hinting at the complexity and potential significance of what was to come, and she felt a subtle thrill of comprehension, recognizing that the timing, location, and sequence of actions had aligned to reveal a story that was at once intimate and profound, a demonstration of how a small, unassuming act could trigger consequences far beyond expectation. The stranger shifted slightly, gesturing toward a bench bathed in sunlight where frost was beginning to melt, and Eleanor moved with deliberate care, feeling the firmness of her shoes against the gravel path and the crisp winter air filling her lungs. A mixture of calm and alert anticipation coursing through her as she prepared to observe and respond to the subtle nuances of the encounter. Every gesture, every glance, and every slight inflection of tone now seemed imbued with meaning, and Eleanor realized that her role in the narrative was active yet measured, that her patience, observation, and quiet decisiveness would shape the unfolding events just as much as the revelations themselves, and she allowed herself a deep, steadying breath, letting the winter air sharpen her focus and illuminate her understanding. As she stood poised to witness the culmination of cause and effect set into motion by a simple, thoughtful act, a chain of events that had turned an ordinary morning into a sequence of insight, recognition, and carefully observed consequence. The ordinary transformed into extraordinary through the subtle interplay of human attention, perception, and responsiveness, and Eleanor felt a steady, calm confidence in her ability to navigate the unfolding story, recognizing the quiet power inherent in observation, presence, and deliberate action, all converging on this sunlit winter morning within the pavilion. The sun had risen higher now, casting long, warming beams across the pavilion floor and illuminating the frost that still clung stubbornly to the edges of benches and railings, and Eleanor stood with a calm attentiveness, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp winter air, each exhale grounding her in the moment and heightening her awareness of every subtle detail around her. From the soft crunch of gravel underfoot to the faint rustle of a squirrel in a nearby tree, all contributing to the quiet rhythm of the park, a rhythm she had often observed but now felt intimately tied to the unfolding events. She held the envelope firmly, the paper smooth and slightly cool against her palm, a tangible reminder that the small gesture she had made earlier had led to this extraordinary encounter, and she considered the many years she had devoted to quiet, unnoticed acts of kindness, small attentions to neighbors, friends, and even strangers, realizing that these simple choices, offered without expectation, had shaped the trajectory that now brought her here, poised and aware, ready to receive and respond with deliberate calm. The stranger gestured gently toward a small bench bathed in sunlight, inviting her to sit, and Eleanor complied, noting the way the light caught the frost, sparkling like tiny crystals and adding a sense of ethereal beauty to the scene, and she felt a mixture of anticipation and quiet reassurance, understanding that the unfolding story depended on observation, reflection, and measured presence as much as on what was being revealed, and she adjusted her scarf and coat, feeling the soft warmth against her skin, a subtle counterpoint to the crisp air that pressed against her cheeks and hands. The stranger spoke in a measured, calm voice, outlining details with careful clarity, his words neither rushed nor excessive, allowing Eleanor to absorb each fact, each nuance, the connections between them, and to reflect on how her earlier act of kindness had been noticed, recognized, and valued in a way she could not have imagined. And she felt the weight of significance settle around her like the sunlight warming the frost, a quiet reminder that small, deliberate acts could produce consequences far greater than their immediate appearance. She studied the way his eyes met hers, noting the precise, careful attention with which he communicated, and realized that the interplay of gesture, tone, and presence carried as much meaning as the words themselves, reinforcing the sense that this was not a fleeting encounter, but a moment of careful orchestration, a sequence in which her patience, awareness, and composure were as important as any revelation. Eleanor breathed slowly and deliberately, letting the winter air sharpen her senses, attuning herself to the subtleties of movement and sound, feeling a calm confidence in the unfolding narrative, aware that the ordinary had become extraordinary, that a simple act of consideration had revealed layers of insight, connection, and potential, and she remained poised on the sunlit bench, fully present, fully observant, and fully prepared to witness and engage with the quiet unfolding of events that had begun on that freezing morning, each detail imbued with meaning, each action carrying forward the consequences of kindness, perception, and mindful attention, all converging into a singular moment of understanding, reflection, and quiet revelation. The sunlight had warmed the frost enough to create tiny glimmers across the pavilion floor, casting delicate patterns that shifted with every movement of the branches above, and Eleanor sat quietly, her hands resting on the envelope that had guided her through the unfolding morning, feeling its weight as both an anchor and a key to the revelations about to emerge, while her senses absorbed every subtle detail around her. The soft creak of the wooden beams, the distant murmur of early park visitors, the occasional flutter of birds between the bare branches, each sound and motion reinforcing her awareness that she was present in a moment of significance. She adjusted her coat and scarf, drawing in the crisp air deeply, appreciating the way it cleared her mind and sharpened her attention, and she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the quiet acts of kindness, patience, and observation that had shaped her character over decades, realizing now that these small gestures had led to the recognition, respect, and unfolding insight she experienced in this sunlit space, and she understood that her engagement, awareness, and deliberate calm would determine how she responded to the sequence of events set into motion by her earlier actions. The stranger gestured subtly toward a small, intricately carved box placed on the central bench, its polished wood reflecting the morning light, and Eleanor reached for it with careful hands, feeling the smooth surface and noting the delicate weight, a tangible object that symbolized the culmination of the quiet chain of events. And as she opened it, the contents revealed insights and acknowledgments that both confirmed her perceptions and expanded her understanding of the subtle ways in which small acts could ripple outward to create meaningful connections and unexpected outcomes. She observed each detail with deliberate focus, noting how the arrangement and presentation spoke of consideration, intentionality, and recognition, and she felt a profound sense of clarity, a quiet exhilaration tempered by reflective calm, understanding that her attentiveness, measured response, and consistent presence had created the space for this revelation to occur, and that she had participated fully and wisely in the sequence of events, not as a passive observer, but as an engaged and discerning participant. Eleanor folded her hands briefly over the box, acknowledging its significance, and took a slow, steadying breath, feeling the winter air fill her lungs, the combination of sunlight, crispness, and soft sounds around her grounding her in the moment, reinforcing her sense of calm authority, and she realized that the ordinary morning had transformed into an extraordinary series of observations, reflections, and revelations that would linger in memory, a testament to the quiet power of patience, perception, and thoughtful action, and she allowed herself to fully absorb the experience, her mind and body attuned to the gentle unfolding of insight, understanding, and recognition that had begun with a simple, kind gesture on a freezing bench and had culminated in this sunlit pavilion, leaving her with a sense of accomplishment, quiet wonder, and deep appreciation for the subtle ways in which attention, care, and composure shape the course of human experience.